Hey guys. So I've got page 18 here for you. God, I'm hoping this audio is working because I recorded a video before and there were some problems, which was unfortunate because it was really good, like problem solving type stuff. So I tested the sound out. Supposedly it's working fine. We'll see. Anyhow, so here's page 18, in which I showed you the sort of layout process, going from layouts to starting to tighten up the inks. I mean the pencils. What you see here on the screen now is like the finished Titan pencils. There's a video of that, me starting out with the pencils and then a time lapse afterwards. So what I did here is it was on a separate level. All these like shadows and stuff I did on another layer to sort of help spot some lighting tricks and stuff. Pardon me, most of which I can do just in my mind without actually laying down anything. Spotting my blacks is such a big part of my process. It's so sort of organic at this point that I find it's hard to explain. So instead of just rolling along with it as I usually do, I'm going to create another layer here. And I grab a pen that I use with a lighter opacity, really large, and sloppily, I'm going to spot some black areas here, some shadow and stuff. Obviously, one of the things you want to think about with your spotting of blacks, and I'm going to way lower the opacity. Actually, I'm going to bring the opacity back up on the pencil some and keep the opacity pretty low on the shadows I'm going to lay down. And the shadows don't have to be in any way nicely done or exact. Like, it's just to give myself an idea. I'm blocking out what these shapes are or shadows are gonna be like. So that's what I'm doing on this other layer here. I'm just gonna do this pretty quickly. And one of the things that I try to do is go black, white, black, white, black, white, and you'll see this sort of pattern pop up. So when I'm thinking of the background here, keeping in mind that this is a bowling alley which has this very long horizontal shape to it, I'm going to look to lay down some black in this area against this face. And I'll figure out shapes later exactly, like there might be one of those screens up in here. Maybe get more black there. I'm just blocking out big shapes. These big shapes give me an idea of where to lay down the contrast. So now you can see it's going to be black back here, white for his hair, black on his face, white, black. Try and get that checkered pattern thing going on. And that's something I learned from Dave Johnson. He had told me a long time ago when I was first figuring out my black spotting and stuff, and how to give weight to the page. One of the things that he said to me was try and make your page 50% black. It's not always possible. Scenes don't always call for that. It's not always practical, but it's a good mindset to go into. And what's fun with doing these kind of black spotting, quick overlays here is it allows you to really play with it. This panel here looks like it's going to be fairly complicated, so I'll probably wait for the most part to figure out exactly all the details here. This is a shadow of one of the other characters falling on top of another character, which I like to do. Usually you want to do that when something's imposing. Throwing a shadow of another character literally on top of another character says a lot. You don't want to just do it randomly. I mean, you can, but I like for things to have some sort of meaning to it, I mean, even a shot of them being behind the bowling pins here, the idea of striking out, of all the pins being knocked down, being set up, all those sort of metaphors are there. I don't know if it really affects the readers, but sometimes I think subliminal stuff like that does affect you. Like, you do see it, whether it registers or not. Kind of like music. sets a tone. You know, there are visual stuff that will set a tone for you. This is that panel that I traced of my own photo, but obviously, or I think obviously, I traced it loosely enough that it doesn't look like suddenly there's a photo tracing in the middle of this. The proportions are a little weird around here from the head because of it was taken from a real photo, but as I laid it out, I adjusted it, and I'm going to do it again in the inks. Let's see. The background here, I knew there was this weird shape design that I threw on the wall. And even though these are two different panels here, see how I connected them with this shape and the shape of the bench that they're sitting on. So it's important to continue that with the black spotting as well. It's going to be largely in shadow in the front. I'm leaving so this is what's called core lighting on Valentine's character in the front. That means the core of him is dark, and then the outline of him is light. So it's maybe it should be the other way around, core or shadowing or something. I'm not sure, but I like this effect a lot, where basically the character is almost all in silhouette except for the exterior lines, and then you can have fun like dropping outlines and stuff like that. But we'll get into that as we get closer. Also, you can make early decisions like how much black am I going to drop on a face and cover up details. Sometimes the hardest thing when I use a lot of black is the fact that I will ultimately cover up a drawing that I like. And I think it's a weakness of mine that sometimes I will sacrifice black spotting or noir or graphics for the sake of the face that I like to draw. I don't want to cover it up with shadows all the time, but really, that's what you have to. All right, so now I created another layer, and a neat trick sometimes. This is going to be my ink layer, so right under it, I often will lock that layer so I don't accidentally end up drawing underneath it. I still screw up sometimes, and I'll draw down here. That's really sucks, and hopefully that'll happen at some point, and then I can show you different tricks of fixing it if it's too late. You can't go back in the process. So this is going to be my ink layer. Again, I'm in a bad habit of not labeling my layers, but I'm going to do them for you here. So this will be the ink layer. I'm drawing at actual size here, so this is like that 6.9 by 10 something. I forget what the exact measurement is. Actually, canvas size. 6.7 by 10.43 is the print proportions. That's 600 dpi. I'm using this Inker Analog Gritty Realistic. I don't remember if this is one of the brushes I imported. You can get from like Kyle brushes and Fendrin, all these other great brushes and stuff. I don't remember if that's one of those or one of the ones that came with it. I like that there's a slight grittiness to it. I wish I could get a little bit grittier, but I'm really bad at adjusting brushes and stuff, and I'm not that familiar with doing that in Clip Studio. So for now, I'm just getting by with what I can, and when I learn stuff, I'll show you guys. So let's get right into the inks here. At this size, I realized that for my main figure work, anywhere between the size 40 to 70 or 80 works pretty well for giving brush sizes that are comparable to what I would use on an actual brush on actual paper. I've done a lot of comparing the two. So I've got the opacities kind of lowered down on these so I can see through and not confuse my ink line with anything else. I try not to zoom in too much, because if I zoom in too much, I'm going to put in too much detail. Which is fine if you're a highly detailed artist. But I try to go by mostly with shapes as opposed to details. Now I'm going to attempt something weird on here, which I don't know will work out or not. I'm going to attempt to kind of draw his Val's reflection in the beer bottle. But we'll see. first I want to get the other details down. So this is the FBI agent's hand holding the bottle. I want to get that all right first, or as right as I can get it. I like to call myself an imperfectionist. I think there's a fine line between being quick, being loose, being sloppy. You don't want to be sloppy, even if it's loose. And I think that for me, if I work at perfection too much, if I work at making everything right, I kind of choke up. Some of the biggest jobs I've had where I wanted to do my very best, I don't think they were, because sometimes I choked by being too stifled by my own attempts at being great or perfect or knocking out of the ballpark. Sometimes you have to forget something like, oh, I'm drawing Batman. Well, don't let that get in your head, because if you do get to draw Batman and you let it get in your head, it's not going to be the best Batman it could be. Although I think I did fairly well on all my Batman stuff, the things that I did. I got to write and draw a Batman story, which was a lot of fun. And I did like a Batman 66. And yeah, I was able to stay pretty relaxed on those. Transversely, I've also been too loose on stuff. I look back at my Black Panther, and I did like some Avengers stuff that parts I do really wish I had tightened up my brush work more, that I had made my brush lines a little prettier. Partially because that's the audience. You know, people don't really read Black Panther and X-Men or Avengers and stuff because they want Alex Toth style loose, liquidy brush work. You know, they want tight lines and a certain level of perfection. Perfection might be the wrong phrase. I don't know. I'm obviously working and talking at the same time, so it might not always make sense. I'm also trying to slow down my Jersey voice. I know I don't really have the accent, but in listening some of my videos, I realize I talk really fast. So I'm trying to slow that down a little bit. Bear with me. Also some basic ink and stuff here. Let's go. So this is the collar on his shirt. The light is coming from above and to the right. So the upper lines, where the light is touching near the top, are going to be lighter. Then it'll be heavier, lighter, and then heavier. Now there's just so many different ways to do this. Like I could have actually make all of these heavy because the light's coming from over there, right? Sort of exaggerated out like that. That's not wrong. It's just a different way of going about it. I definitely want to do a video sometime about shadows too. So there's sort of two different philosophies I found when doing a shadow on something, is whether I'm laying the shadow down on the object, or if I make the object kind of solid and then lay the shadow behind it. Like the object is either casting a shadow from the object, or is there a shadow being captured on the object. Kind of complicated, and these aren't good examples right here. So hopefully, well, actually, sort of here, right? So check out the back. So this is the back of the bench that they're sitting on. Now, I could do something like this. So this is the shadow on the object. So I'm basically making him just dark all here, right? Because the shadow is coming here. So imagine this is all black. That's one way to do it. That's the shadow is on the object. Another way to do it is the shadow off of the object, which is the object is casting the shadow, which I like in this case a little bit better. We'll talk about that more as I have other opportunities to do that. This background, I'm going to keep it abstract. I'm not going to get very detailed with the actual what it is. I'm going to create shapes that indicate a background. A lot of times I do that because I know it's going to get covered with dialogue. Actually, there's a good amount of dialogue on this first panel. So it doesn't really make sense for me to go ahead and draw tiles and clocks and all that kind of stuff that would be in the background, because most of it's going to be covered by dialogue. So In this case, I'm going to have an abstract background that expresses a shape and a place. And that place is the corner of this long room that they're in. You know, like a bowling alley is long, right? I could use perspective rollers and stuff in here, but something you can do after you've had enough experience is, and if your work calls for that kind of thing, like mine does, it's a little abstract, it's looser, I can get away with eyeballing my perspective. And I'm sure if you laid down a perspective grid, this wouldn't be 100% accurate. But you know what? It feels accurate. At least to me. Normally I fill in all the black afterwards, or I drop the black line in afterwards, but just for the sake of you guys watching and seeing what's supposed to happen here, I'll do it all now, which I really like. Oh, this is a thing that I really like about Clip Studio, is I can take my paintbrush here, or the paint bucket, and instead of individually going boom, boom, like that, if two objects or more are connected, I can just drag it across and it fills in like this. That's pretty awesome. I like that. And then I also like doing this, just kind of testing out. Like, all right, that's a little too much, kind of, but I like it. And maybe I actually like a shadow going across his face here. And I think I do. But I can't quite have it like that. So what I'm going to do then, meaning I need to still see his hair. So let's try. What was it that I liked about this? It was, yeah, I like how the eyes are kind of covered here. So should see. He has a really receding hairline, so I need to pull some of that back as well. Yeah, I like that. Alright, that's pretty cool. It's more interesting than it was before. And again, black, white, black, white. I can go further with that, but I think that's good enough. That line is really thin, so I thicken it out a little bit. Alright, now let's see about this face that I threatened to draw, or to attempt. So now I'm going to go with a much smaller brush. I'm going to go down to 12. I try not to go below 12 or 15, because then it starts to get so small that you're getting into territory of other artists who work in a lot of detail, which doesn't necessarily work on my stuff. In a face like this, it doesn't have to look like Val. It doesn't have to be accurate, really. It just needs to represent a face. And all the lines here are just, I'm trying to go along with the shape, you know. Boy, I don't know if this works. I don't know. I think that's too distracting. I'm going to leave it in, and then when it gets colored, I'll talk to Taki, who is my colorist, my wife. Sorry. And so that makes it easy to be able to talk about this kind of stuff. Be like, hey, let me see that panel when it's done. Does this make sense what I did? Does it make sense what we did together? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Let's get back to panel 2 now. I'm going to go back up to 50. I could get larger with this, like a 60, because it's a close-up of his face. I'm going to leave a little bit of space here between, pardon me, the black of his eye and his bridge, the bridge of his nose. Just a little bit. And that just sort of expresses the shape a little bit better than if it was flush against here. You hear me talk about shapes a lot. One of the things I think is important when you're starting out, and I've mentioned this before during the penciling stage of this, was that whole, you've seen figures drawn in like sort of tubes and squares and stuff, and when you first start drawing it doesn't seem to make sense. But what that does is it helps you understand the form and shape of things. Like, look at my glove here. So right now it's straight on. So basically, the glove, the line on my glove here just goes straight across, just like a line would if this was some sort of cylinder. But now if I move my hand forward, now you start to see this U shape into the line. If I go backwards, it's it's like an inverted U shape. That's kind of the idea of like shapes and when I'm talking about forms and shape is the expression of three-dimensionality on a two-dimensional platform. It's kind of weird. It takes a while to get your head wrapped around, but it's one of my favorite things is finding shapes. Like especially this here, this panel, this fake background that I drew. It's just all shapes. It's all shapes that express a real object. It's almost like an optical illusion. One of the things I also try to do is make sure that these lines don't get too perfect or too they need some edge and some shape to them. Like I look back at some of my older stuff before I was working all digitally, and there's a little bit more of a bite and edge to it that's just hard to get digitally. And I still work traditionally as well, even page wise. There's a couple of pages early on that I did in Murder Inc. On this issue that was traditional. The main reason that I work digital these days is the time. You cannot compare the time that it takes to draw a page traditionally, at least me, and I'm fast. I can't compare that to the time that it takes to draw digitally. It's just so much faster digitally. There's so many more ways of doing the same thing faster. There is a certain brush quality that I'm not getting quite the same, but I think it's mostly me. It's mostly just in my head. I know that there's a difference there, and I know that because there have been pages that I look at where somebody has asked me, was this drawn traditionally or not, and I can't tell, which is a good sign. But in a perfect world, I'd have all the time in the world, but I'm also just not built that way. I'm built for speed, and I draw like I'm being chased. All right. This panel's gonna be a little time consuming, but let's get into it. So I got to go smaller here. I'm going to try and keep the line width around 17 or so. I know where well, I could go thicker than that. 25. Oh, I've also got my stabilization turned way up right now. When I was doing that hair back here and talking about I needed to get a little rougher, toothier, sharper with it or whatever, I should have had that stabilization turned down. And I have a super steady hand, so I'm not using stabilization to make things easier. It has to do a lot with, I'm drawing on glass right now, which has different, even with this, I've got like a film on it, which gives it a sense of texture, and it gives it a sense, a feeling of something tactile to draw against, but it's just not the same thing as paper. So the stabilization helps with that. It does help with these really big shapes here, like on the couch. But now that we're doing the figure work, I'm going to lower that down. I also noticed that if I have it way off, I don't quite get as sharp of a tip point for some reason. So, like, I really like this. I like my points to be able to be really pointy. And for some reason, with the stabilization up a little bit, it gives it more of that. And I find around 20 for some reason on my computer, that's the way it works. It'll probably work differently on your computer depending on how fast it is and all that stuff. Alright, so it's the back of Agent Bell's head. the light's coming from this side, so I should actually keep this a little lighter. So the light's coming from this side, so there's less of a thickness. But then as it goes down, I'm going to go thicker again, and then go light. So basically the reason it goes thicker here is it's if the light's hitting it in this way, by making it thicker here, it can give it more shape, more form, more depth. Okay. So even though there's some, oh, okay. I was gonna say, even though there's a nice shaping here, this whole thing is gonna go into black, but then I left a little highlight there. And then I might go in with a weight pen afterwards and even touch that up some. I like the shape that it shows. Same thing here, thin to thick. Like the closer your line is aiming towards the lighter it'll be. The more it goes away from it, the darker it'll be, or wider it will be. So the light is up here somewhere. So let's say there's light source coming here. So most of my line work is going to feel like this, like thinner as it's facing the light, and then thicker as it goes away from the light. So this is facing the light. This is kind of away because it's under his head, but then his head, top of his head faces the light, and then it gets thick again. Even though there's just going to be shape. No detail. Womp, womp, womp. So I've got all kinds of shadows going on here. Let's see if I could keep track of it. When I laid down those shadows, I did it nice and abstract, so it can make it a little more difficult to go in here now and do these details. Also, this is a small panel, so I don't need to get too detailed. If I do, it actually becomes weirdly muddy with my style. Okay, he's got a shirt on. I think I'm going to keep his collar will be black. Collar will be black on the inside here, but white on the outside. His arm and his sleeve is open. This is all going to be in black. It's a little bit highlight. He's putting out a cigarette in this panel, so I want to make sure that you can see the cigarette in this panel. It doesn't have to be big and obvious. It's just a little shot there. Boy, that hand's bad. Do I have enough fingers? Yeah. I'm going to leave the hand for now. And then often what I do is I try to sit on the page for a day, or at least a few hours, so that I can come back and look at it again. If that hand sticks out to me as being weird, then I will fix it. If it doesn't, then I'll just, if it doesn't stick out, it doesn't stick out. So I'll just leave it as is. I might also fix it just as I'm going along, but generally I just try not to sweat it. It's also kind of awkward, but we'll see how it looks when I look at the whole thing. So you want to put a lot of care into what you're doing and quality, but you don't want that care and quality to become a problem. You don't want that care and quality to be a obstacle. That could be a real problem. I also think, because I'm feeling a little paranoid about the sound again, I think what I'm going to do is stop this after this panel and just split this video into two, just to be on the safe side. So something else that happens here is the whole, you can't see it now, but as the pages were together, I've established there's an earlier scene where we know that there's a gun in his jacket. and that gun comes into play later. So we want to make sure that that jacket is in shot occasionally. Boy, he looks out of proportion to these two. Yeah, it kind of looks like a giant now that I'm looking at it. So I'm either going to make him smaller or them bigger. I think I'm going to make them bigger. So I'm going to grab the lasso tool. Just going to grab them. I was thinking for a second there of grabbing those bottles as well, but I don't know. This is what I did. You can also fill in some of this dead space here. Yeah, that's a lot better. This is another reason why I keep my frames on another level, another layer, so that when I'm inking, if I go beyond the border, it's easy enough to just fix. Just plop it out. Whoops, I went too far there. No big deal. Actually, now that I look at it, maybe I'm going to start to indicate the shape there. Okay. Another thing that I do is I know that this background is going to be on here with the bowling alley. It's going to be, I don't want to call it complicated, but it's definitely going to be a little more time consuming. So I'm going to leave it for now because I like that sense of moving forward. So sometimes it drives me nuts to do everything on one panel. Because I like that sense of accomplishment of I'm moving forward with the page. Yeah, so there's going to be a bowling alley thing back here. All right, now I'm going to pause it here just so that I can double check my sound to make sure things are working well before we go to the next thing. So this video will be in 2 parts, and I hope this is cool so far.